For the love of rugby, brought to you by Black Heart. There's a new stout in town. But we are joined by YouTuber Squidge Rugby.
Hi.
Our favourite YouTuber. We love him. He loves the pod. We love his channel. Check it out. Now,
Max Brown
Sorry,
is
Max.
in the room.
I know Max.
He's in the room.
Yeah, but Max has come in once. Squidge has been in like 10 times. So we're at different
He's our
levels,
favourite
Max.
other channels,
Yeah, I know. but
other
it's-
social media channels.
All right.
Yeah.
Do you want me to do it again? Sorry, Max. Yeah. I'll take this opportunity to publicly apologise to Max in the background there, who's also our second favourite, but he hasn't been in as much as Squidge. So therefore, you know, we've just got a better relationship, haven't we, Squidge?
That's what I get by on is just turning up.
Yeah.
Just invited or otherwise, I'll be here.
Now, I had a terrible job at predicting during the autumn, which was, well, I suppose I had to have some humble pie. But you have actually done a prediction, and I've got hold of that prediction.
I hate doing predictions because you can only be wrong. Even if you're right, you're wrong in some way.
Well, I'm going to share your predictions. And I know that you said that it changes on a daily basis, but this is what you've gone for. Your prediction is France first,
Yep.
Ireland second, England third,
Yeah.
Scotland fourth, Italy fifth.
Yeah.
And this must have hurt being a Welshman, but you've put Wales as sixth.
I think it's the natural Welsh pessimism. I think it's just something in the valley water is you end up going, we'll probably be sixth this year and just hope that you overshoot that and end up maybe in the heady heights of fifth.
Do you reckon there's like the Welsh public is kind of at that level where like almost the expectation is low,
Yeah.
sixth. Therefore, like it almost the team has sort of such a free swing at any team they play that actually makes them quite dangerous in a way.
Yeah.
And I know that kind of sounds bizarre, but because the expectation isn't huge on them, that all of a sudden they can find themselves in games and then tight games, and then if you're playing against them as such, it's like, well, this isn't how it's meant to be.
Yeah.
And that sort of Gatland way of being dogged and stay in there, which we haven't seen as late, but they've got a lot of people coming back that are genuinely world-class players.
Yeah.
So I'm not too far off your predictions.
Yeah.
But we'll delve into it a bit. Let's start with France.
Yeah. Who I think have to be the favourites going in. I think in the autumn they were really impressive. They looked fantastic. The key name, you can pull out any number of guys who've been great playing club rugby or in the autumn or, over the last year. But the key guy is Antoine Dupont. Like, that is the be-all and end-all. And, like, I had this conversation with someone the other day that I had this kind of sneaking feeling I could see England beating France at Twickenham. Then I remember Dupont would be playing. And you kind of go, well, can I picture Antoine Dupont losing a game of rugby? It becomes quite difficult. Like, I think that France team, with so many of their startings back in, they're missing Gaël Fickou, which is going to be interesting, as their kind of main defensive leader. Like, it gives like a Gaëtan a chance to step up and really show what he can do. But yeah, the Dupont's back, Untermach's back. You've got so many of those key players that made them so dangerous in years gone by together pretty much for the first time since they won that Grand Slam in 2022. Like, they've kind of got that core of the team back together. So I think they go in as favourites for me.
Well, Intermac and Dupont haven't played together since 2023, actually. Obviously, they have in terms of Toulouse, sorry.
Yeah.
But in terms of the international stage, they haven't. But you ignite that back together, and it's a pretty scary prospect. And then you add in guys like Damien Penaud. I think what has he got? Offloads 11, line breaks 11. Like, he's mad on all the stats. And then Louis Bier-Barry, I did say that correctly, thank you. And you put those danger men out, and you're right, the insides, giving those guys space, like that is pretty frightening.
I think 2023, Damien Penaud broke more tackles than he got tackled. Like, he's just ridiculous. And then you've got Biel-Barré, who the form he's been in is quite something else. That little like grubber he does, which, I suppose you found out very well yourselves, but it is so dangerous. And so, he's a player who can turn what looks like a nothing situation or any turnover ball into 7 points out of nowhere. And France are just packed with these players that they're almost like quite hard to analyze because so much of it is individual stuff. And that's why I think like having both Untermach and Dupont back is so important for them, because they play off each other so well. And you have so much, like, you look at the autumn when we had that New Zealand game and they went so hard on Dupont. Like, they were, I've never seen an All Blacks team target one player so hard, and they managed to nullify him an awful lot. But I think you then throw Untermack into that situation and that becomes a very different game. You know, I think he probably does a lot more in terms of like working around that. So I think having the pair of them back in tandem is really exciting.
I think there's so much to be said with synergy. But like you, if you're scrummaging, Coley, with certain hookers and loose heads that you play with all the time, like a lot of those fundamental parts of the game already ironed out because you're so used to playing with them.
I also think with 9s and 10s, obviously you have that connection of, you know, the more cohesive you are, the more you play together, you know where they're going to be before they're there in some regards. I think that's with Dupont and Entermack, is their ability to play off each other. Whether Dupont goes at the line, Entermack flattens up, or vice versa, you know, or he's in the backfield and swinging around. They kind of can read each other's games. I think my thing with the French is they last season's tournament was almost like the hangover from the World Cup. I think they sort of felt the first couple of games in that, they felt, you know, they changed their style a bit. I think they sort of tried to run the ball a bit more and went away from what made France really good. But I think, as you've seen at the end of last season, Six Nations, and the autumn this year, they've sort of got back to being the France we know of. They're sort of not structured, but Dupont can kick a ball a mile, can't he? Out
off both feet.
Yeah, off both feet, exactly. It's like you think about Dupont being the run in the French run everywhere, but actually it's like inside their own half, they can kick the ball a mile off the field and they pressure set piece, and then when the backs come alive with kick return or anything like that, they can, or set plays off set piece, they have the individual talent to rip you apart.
Yeah.
In your predictions, you're humming and hawing about whether it's a Grand Slam or not.
Yeah.
Do you think France can do the Slam?
I think they can. I think it's within them. I think I said in my prediction that I don't think they will. I think the biggest banana skin for them is the England game at Twickenham. I think Ireland will probably go into, you know, incredibly fired up. They've got the opening game against Wales, but then they've got to go away to Twickenham against an England team who, and we'll get on to them. But I think the bigger the game, the better England have played and the more they've got themselves up for it generally over the last, you know, year or two. And that feels like the banana skin for them to slip up, as it were. But it's hard to say. It's hard to say. Like, I don't necessarily know who beats them if France are on song, if they're, you know, firing on all cylinders.
Even if there's not a Grand Slam, it's the fact that bonus points come into play now.
Yeah.
And you look at the Sage Insights and you look at Thomas Ramos, for instance, his kicking stats. So, like, even trying to stay in touch with them, like, the guy is a machine. So last year's Six Nations, he kicked 63 points. And France were not the France that we recognise right now, nor the one prior to World Cup. Last year was a bit of a hangover from it, as we discussed it, didn't we? We felt like it's a bit, but this year they're well and truly back. So even trying to stay in touch with them, you've got ill discipline against them. Like, the guy just doesn't miss. Like, he's phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, he's 30 odd points off being France's all-time top point scorer.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, he's kind of crept up out of nowhere. Like, he's just been so metronomic that no one's noticed him kind of climb this chart.
No, I haven't not noticed that. No. But you're right. But he is a machine.
Yeah, he just doesn't miss. And I've rarely seen a player who's more different between what they do when the ball's in general play to on the tee. That he can be this kind of like maverick that'll, you know, throw passes behind the back or between his legs on his own try line. And normally he gets out of jail free because, you know, you've got Untermack or Dupont with him and he just leaves his little mate to do the tidying up. But he will do mad things. More of them come off than not. And then on the tee, he's the coolest, most collected, like, nothing phases him whatsoever, Iceman. Like, I've never seen a player with the sheer difference between two sides of his game as Thomas Ramos.
Coley, Le Crunch, extremely famous game between England and France, but they love a scrum. What is the French scrum like? And given the size, they go heavy in the lock department as well. Charles Ollivon, of course, is out. So, you know, the back row, they often use him as a jumper, so it'd be interesting to see what they do with that dynamic. But they use weight in the second row, right? They have one pushing lock rather than a lifting lock. What do you expect from that scrum, mate?
I expect it to be big and heavy.
Very heavy.
The thing with the French, they're kind of, you know, you're going to go for a contest, as in it's going to be hard, but sometimes they lull you into like a false sense of security in regards to the first couple of scrums. You're kind of like, you're pushing you as hard as you can, and they're just like, oh, you think they're pushing also equally as hard, and there'll just be one or two scrums a game where they fully go for it, and you're like, all right, yeah, you win. So they're a dangerous scrum. You can't take any scrum lightly against the French. Everything you do, you've basically got to be full on. They say they're big and heavy, but say as soon as you show any weakness, they will massively exploit it. Played in Lyon last year, and I say one of the big things was the scrum, and not, I think we had like a 5-metre scrum, and it was basically just anchoring in, because you have Antonio's 140-something kilos, and I say the squad this year, as you said, the second rows will be ginormous, and they want to commit the 8 to pushing the scrum. But then, of course, if your flankers stay on to stop pushing and DuPont runs around and, they've got so many ways to beat you off the scrum. So it is a challenge, but you have to meet it head on.
How much do they go for you on your ball compared to on their ball? For listeners, for the people that obviously on their ball, they've got the decision whether to leave it in the scrum or, of course, play it away. And on your ball, you have the same option. But how much are they going forcing you to the ball gets stuck in second row's feet and all that?
Yeah, they attack. A lot of it depends, especially on the engagement and the hook. And I think the longer the scrum goes on, the probably more it favours the French, as they have the ability to. They're such big human beings that when they coordinate as an 8 and snap together, you are in. It's tough, but a lot of it depends. I think it's the individual abilities of each other to work out. If Cyril Bay gets a bit of a loose head, gets a nudge, and he's going to go for it. Similar to Antonio at tight head, so they know each other well in that regard.
And the difference that the likes of Miafu and Tuolangi as well coming into the second row must make as well, on top of the sheer size of some of the players behind that front row.
Oh, well, those blokes are 130 kilos plus. Well, Tuolangi is probably bigger, and even before that, Willemse, who's 130. They're big men, and that's what their purpose is, to go around and hit things, which they do, and also push in scrums. They're not particularly, as we've said before about line-out lifting, is, we have big men. George Martin's 123 kilos, but he's given away 20 kilos to some of their guys. And then in a pushing contest, that mass moves mass, as they say. So it does add up. That's where you've got to be, mentally switch on every scrum and make sure you're technically, against the French, try and go as low as possible and anchoring. Which is old school, but it's what you've got to do.
Well, it's the mauling, it's the brawling, it's all the other bits, but then, of course, the ball carrying as well.
Yeah.
And then that obviously opens up more space for guys like DuPont, speed of ball. You see French teams, which don't often... Sorry.
You watch the French teams play, and sometimes they can make something out of nothing. Because they've got such big men, they carry one off, and it takes few of them to stop them. And there's just a little offload out the top, and it's another one where they carry, and they almost get this momentum roll. They're not such... Sometimes they are structured, but in attack you'll see them. But sometimes it slows down, and then Aldrich will carry and just give an offload, or there's someone over the top, and then the defence gets sucked in. Then DuPont's running, and everything just feeds off that, and it's just big man after big man after big man, and then there'll be an offload, or just even the breakdown is it becomes quicker because they just have big men falling forward and committing to your defenders, and then they just almost pick and go, and then it opens up and expands. And that's the French are so brilliant. It's not structured in that regards, in you pick and go here. They basically just play on momentum and feel, and that's what makes them so dangerous, because you commit to stop the big runners, even just pick and go. It's almost like it's not dynamic in some regards, but it becomes dynamic on the fact that they get momentum, and then they can run, and then runners come off that and just read each other really well.
It's that noir call that they use where, that kind of Razzie pulled up in the Chasing the Sun too, where they will have one runner will run and the forwards almost line up in a line behind each other and just take offload after offload. So it's just alive and it sucks in, so many tackles into one area that then expands out wider. It's really smart.
There isn't too many, there can't think of another nation that do that in terms of one-off and the ability to recognise speed of ball and where the space is.
Yeah.
So it's little offload, in behind you, a defence, tighten up, lose a collision, the next one, lose a collision, speed of ball, then DuPont's out, and then Intermax pulling through. And you can see it now.
Yeah.
And these are why, when you look at the insights, Sage Insights, this is why Penno's stats are absolutely off the chart. He's in all the stats, meters carried, 422, for instance, meters gained. He's on 316, try assist, the most is with 3. He's got it because they sort of tighten you up, and then they release these dynamite players in these wide channels.
But they have the ability, the French game, when we last played Bordeaux recently, it was kind of, it's not a stalemate, but then you kick return, Penno will go, and there's already 3 guys with him behind, and then you have that option, just play to the wing, then they're breaking through tackles, and the big men, and they've got the ability, skill, and then they offload, and away they go, and that's the kind of the French almost set themselves up for that. They don't play much with DuPont stuff. They don't play a lot in their own half, but as soon as they get the ability to come alive in the space, they go, and they've got the players to do it. You watch the French league, it's almost in some regards, forwards, it's a grind fest, little offload, and then boom, they're into it, and that's the way the French play.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think they're using Penno more and more as a distributor as well, and in different roles, which is really interesting because I think that Dupont-Ramos axis has come to work really nicely as well, in that they are able to find that space more accurately because they've got 2 players doing it. And then last year we saw, more and more of Penno coming in and playing first receiver or, running things off himself.
That's the thing. It's you almost have those backs that they can all step up to first receiver. So if Ntamack's in a breakdown or anything like that, then Ramos could step up, or Ramos is in, and then Peno came, and they're comfortable on the ball. It's not like they're sort of a winger, I better stand on the wing 30 metres away from play. They're all interested in getting their hands on the ball, and that's what makes them, I think, incredibly dangerous and exciting to watch, is the fact that they want the ball. You come in point zone, they want the ball, and it's sort of like you have to defend 15 players rather than just 2.
So there's France in a nutshell. But which player to watch the most? Other than your obvious.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Like, Antoine Dupont is the answer, and is always the answer. And Roman Ntamack is the second answer, and always the second answer. And Thomas Ramos is the first, and then you keep going on, and Bill Barrett and so on. I think Alexander Roma in the back row has been really quietly very good. And I think with Olivon out, that'll be interesting. And likewise, Gaëtan slotting into 13 along with Fickou out, rather. Gaëtan slotting into 13 with Fickou out. Like, those two players coming in and having to fill a hole. They're both really good, been going really well in the top 14, and can potentially bring something slightly different to those shirts. You know, Gaëtan in particular being more kind of direct, but also, you know, he's quite a big lad and he's, you know, distributes well. So that'd be who I'd be looking to keep an eye on for France.
Lovely insight, that. Ireland. Of course, let's move on to them. No Andy Farrell.
Yeah.
Pendergrass for 10, what we're saying?
That's the thing, yeah. That's the really interesting one, because I think at the minute, Jack Crowley is probably the best 10 in Ireland, but I think Prendergast's ceiling is probably the higher still. And it becomes a question of, do you chuck him in the deep end as they start to do in the autumn? But then you also look at that game against Australia when Crowley came on and bailed them out a bit, you know, and was really impressive off the bench. And is that the way around you want to play them? As you say, you come back to the fact that Simon Easterby's taking over from Andy Farrell, and what instructions has he been left? How strict is Farrell going to be? You know, I imagine they're probably not going to evolve the game plan too much, but in terms of, do they build depth? Does Farrell go, well, while I'm away, you know, try and look at some different options, look at some other things, because it was the one big criticism of them going to that World Cup was that they used the same 23 players every game, and they barely rotated, they barely changed. So you had, you know, a lot of those players got into the World Cup and they played, by the time they got to that New Zealand game, they played, you know, 80 minutes against Romania and Tonga, as well as, you know, the big games that New Zealand have played. And they need to build out a bit of depth there. You know, we've seen in past, they've had injuries and they've slotted someone in effortlessly, but it becomes, can you do that more, you know, deliberately? And I think that's a bit of the big question. And Prendergast feels like the face of that, really.
It's a great debate, because for years, Irish players have essentially been protected in terms of the amount of minutes they play domestically.
Yeah.
And they, of course, play Europe, but not so much in the league. And that's always been a great debate of mine, is Six Nations is obviously spread over 8 weeks. You know, you have a camp 2 weeks leading to the first game, you have fallow weeks, etc. So it almost gives them the rest. But actually, whenever they go into major tournaments, the World Cup being the one, is actually going week after week. And I've always wondered whether they're actually accustomed to doing it.
That's interesting.
We'll see in another couple of years. But anyway, so who would you have at 10? If you were picking Ireland's team, who would you have at 10?
I'd probably go a bit horses for courses. I think you'd probably chuck Prendergast out for the first game, see how he goes, and go back and forth a bit. But I think that's the interesting debate. I think there's some really good touches over that autumn. I think he had the most impressive thing, he had a difficult first 10 minutes against Fiji, ended up in the bin, you know, came back out of the bin and was just great and just really composed for the rest of the game. And I think that showed like the temperament of him, and that he was able to just kind of slip back into playing it as though it was, you know, a game he played 1,000 times before. He played at this level countless times rather than it being his first start at that level. And I think you want him to come through if you're serious about Ireland kind of kicking on to the next stage, because a bit of my gut feeling as a kind of, I don't know, I guess a controversial whatever, but I feel like Ireland are very close to the ceiling at the minute. And I think they've just been kind of like maintaining that level for a very long time, very well. And there hasn't been many signs over the last 2 years that they're still getting better. I think they've climbed to a level in which they are the number 2 team in the world probably. And they're just maintaining there. And I wonder if bringing in someone like Prendergast or bringing in some different blood might help to kick them on a bit, because it feels like they've stagnated in the best possible way. They haven't stagnated and got worse. They've just kind of maintained at this extremely high level, and they hit it every single week. You saw the same with Leinster, you know, and so that's why they were every season they were dominating the URC during the regular season. They were getting through to the European final, and then they couldn't raise the game again once it got into the knockouts. And so they haven't won a trophy for how many of years it is now. And I think they hit the same standard every single week. And then when you get to the odd World Cup game or the odd game in the Six Nations, like that England match last year, it becomes difficult for them to find another level beyond that.
It's fascinating you say that. It's really, I can really see what you're saying there, because you're right. It's still at a very high level.
Yeah.
But how much more is there to go to the next bit?
We wouldn't say when you've got world-class players that they have, and you look at the back line, which is pretty much settled from Gibson Park's a brilliant player, Bundyaki's a brilliant player, like all the way through. And as you say, what's the sort of, those players are already phenomenal. How much better can they get? So then where are you looking for the extra advantage, which probably comes at 10, and that ability to play there, or, and that's the, you just say, look at the French, and they've the big names and Dupont and that kind of stuff, whereas Ireland have got those, and where's the next?
But they're almost big names on the back of where France are more individual based.
Yeah,
like they can do things that Ireland, I feel, are such a well-oiled team that they need, everything has to go a certain way for individuals to shine as such. Where I think France could still shine as individuals and not necessarily need others to do it. Yeah, if I'm making sense there. Where Ireland, I feel, they're so dependent on their structure, their little shapes, their phase count, phase ball, like using James Lowe's left foot to get out and exits and things like that, and the variety that they bring like that. Like they're more as a collective than.
Well, I think they have to be in some regards, probably because as the French can roll out 140 kilo blokes, you know what I mean, and physically beat you up. Whereas Ireland have got physical players, but they don't have the players of that size, so therefore they have to play. They pull you apart with their ability to play rugby, as in like pull the ball at the back and create mismatches through their skill rather than just the pure size. They can be physical, like McCarthy and people like that. And the forwards can be Furlong, Porter. They're, again, world-class players, and they are physical, but they don't have the same. They pull you apart with skill rather than, and that skill within the system they play, rather than just pure like the French, just run over the top of you and offload out the back of it.
When you beat them last year, what were a couple of key areas you just knew you had to get right when playing against them?
You have to pressure their exits, I think, because they actually ran the ball a bit more last year, I think, coming out their own half. They say Ireland were very good at basically, for a long time, they were just, I think, one phase, get the ball off field, and like they'd use James Lowe's left boot, or whatever. They just got out their half, and then they played lots of multiple possessions in your half. So it was about they actually played a bit more last year. It'd be interesting to see if they flip that around, but it's limiting their ability to get into your half, and then also executing in their half, because they also have great jackalers and stuff like that. So it's simple stuff, which sounds simple, but Ireland get into 15 phases. I think the more phases it goes through, the more likely Ireland are to score. Yeah. So it's kind of like you want to limit that ability for them to do that, which also stops them getting in your half.
The one of a big change, the Easterby's the headline, but we also saw last year Mike Catt leave and Andrew Goodman come in as their attack coach. And, he was previously with Leinster. They're running a very, very similar system. Like if you look at stats in terms of how often they go wide, like it's still around the set, they still play to width more than any other team in the world. They still, go beyond second receiver more than any other team in the world. But I think there's been like subtle changes in terms of when they're giving those passes. And I think they're now like that second receiver is in a bit tighter, and we're seeing, I think it's part of their issue in the autumn where their attack was slightly more stagnant than it has been. Just in the fact that like their second receivers and those little like pop passes they like to do in midfield are drawing in fewer players because they're able to stand off a bit more because they're a bit tighter in.
Yeah. Well, I think you saw New Zealand in that World Cup quarterfinal. Not to say gave the blueprint, but
mate, it was massive.
They changed their defence. New Zealand brought out. They changed their defence in almost like a week from what they've been doing previously. But they basically just put 15 blokes, 14 blokes, sort of 14 and 13 blokes in a line, and just let Ireland play. But Ireland relied on people blitzing or coming out the line, and they will always find that hole. They'll always find the blip. Whereas like with New Zealand, literally didn't give them anything, just sat in a line and then sort of made them play to an edge, and then New Zealand obviously got the physicality on the wings to mess the breakdown, slowed it down, and just put into the line and just defend. You saw at the end of the game that they defended sort of 30 odd phases, but just presenting bodies in line. They made no errors indeed. Sort of like no one was stepping out, giving Ireland, because Ireland have the ability, we say, on that sort of arrow shape, to play inside outside. If you create a hole somewhere, they've got good enough footballers to exploit it. Whereas New Zealand just gave them a flat wall, gave them nothing to sort of exploit, and that's I'm not saying more teams are doing that. But I think against the Irish teams are probably, you look at South Argentina in the autumn and stuff like that, present it and not trying to They realise with Ireland's attack is they will exploit any holes you give them. So it's a question of not giving them those holes to exploit.
If you want to hear more about Ireland, I actually caught up with Conor Murray, and you can click the link here and watch that episode on YouTube. Before we move on to England, Squidge, who's a player to watch for Ireland?
Prendergast is the obvious shout. You know, if he's playing, if he's in, he'll be a really interesting story. But I think Caelan Doris is the other one that I think the level he's been playing at the last year or two has been unbelievable. And he does so many small, like, unnoticeable things. Like, he's alongside maybe Gregory Aldrit, like one of the technically best players in the world, like right down to things like his ball presentation and like the angle he comes into rucks at and everything. Like, he's almost perfect in the way he plays the game, you know, as a kind of back row forward. Like, I think he's one to really keep an eye on.
I totally agree with you, because for me, the best eights in the world influence the game, and he influences the game.
Yeah.
Like his ruck selection, his tackle selection, whether he's chopping, whether he's actually wrestling up top to try and slow it down. I think his dialogue with the referee, like you can see he's really taken that to another level. Like sometimes he's almost a pest, but he's entitled to. He's the captain. You can just see all the parts of his game. He's trying to influence the game all the time. I think he's a phenomenal player.
He's
so
amazing.
I totally agree with you. Yeah. I think he's without doubt world leading in that department. So there's France, there's Ireland, and now England.
Yeah,
you've got down as third. All right, do you want to justify it to us both?
Okay, yeah. I think this England team are much better than a lot of people have given them credit for. I think a lot of people have just taken the raw like L's in the column and ignored the fact that this England team to me remind me a little bit, and it's a very heady comparison, of South Africa in 2018, in that they'd gone from being a team who like had really good games but weren't putting it together consistently to England. Every game they played last year, they were in the fight, you know, and they were in to win it in the last 10 minutes. Like even the South Africa game, which is kind of the biggest loss, like they had a chance to win that in the last 10, 15 minutes. And they, you know, you look at that South Africa team in 2018 and the top four teams in the world, well, they were sort of number 5, and like the other top 4 teams in the world being, you know, New Zealand, England, Ireland, Wales. And they played those teams, I think, 8 times, and they won 3 of them. And England played the top 4 teams in the minute 7 times last year. And obviously they only came up with the 1 win against Ireland, but like they were Tomo Ramos being like a yard shorter on a penalty off beating France in Paris, and that George Ford drop goal sailing an inch further, you know, to one side of beating New Zealand and Twickenham. And then you throw in the number of games where so easily there could have been a different bounce or something and they could have come out completely differently. And I think the most important stage, like it's one of the most important stages in building a team, is getting to that stage in which you are in the fight in every single game. And that is like what I'm seeing with England. And I think they feel like they're in that process of building into something properly special. And I feel like we'll talk about this England team very differently in like 5 years' time to how they were talked about last year.
I like it.
No, I like it as well.
Nice.
I know, I totally agree, because I think I'm actually really optimistic about England in the Six Nations. I really am. I've actually tipped them to win in Ireland. I do. I think that, like you've mentioned there, it's come down to fine margins. I think some of the frustration during the autumn was the fact that we just kept getting on the wrong side of it, but we did so many good things and teams kind of left the door open for England to finish them off or certainly put even more pressure on them.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to see a team that starts getting the right side of those results, I think. You know, I think from a fan's point of view, watching England, the big question mark's been since the autumn is, do they continue with the blitz defence? Because although it forces mistakes and you win the ball higher up, it was also costing England in key moments with some of the decisions there. So I'm intrigued to see what they look like. Ireland first game. The other thing with England, and I think, as I mentioned, where they end up and where they finish up, I think, because I don't think there'll be a grand slam like you, I think bonus points will come down to a lot, and therefore try scoring. And that's the other part, is just England's ability to score multiple tries. But I think that England are always in the fight. They're extremely competitive. They haven't quite got on the right side of some of these results. And on another day, they do. Yeah. And I think that momentum will change this Six Nations. So I actually had them at second. I think they'll come second this year.
I love the blitz defense. I really like it as a way of like remaining in control of the game, even when you don't have the ball, you know? And I think you look at teams that go on and win big things, typically they are always in control of the game, or they're always in control of momentum, and they can allow themselves to be on top through the kicking or through their defense, even when the other team is ostensibly attacking. And I really like it as a way to do that and a way to kind of continue building pressure. To give my hottest take in the world, in all of rugby, I feel this England team is more likely to win the next World Cup than Ireland. And Ireland at the minute, I think, have been a better team over the last couple of years. And have certainly, won more games, been higher in the world rankings. But I look at this England team and I think they are much further off their ceiling than Ireland are. And I think they have that ability once they can start being more consistent. And that comes down to both, closing out those close games, but also games like the Australia game in the autumn, which obviously, doesn't have the same level of pressure on it, being able to hit the same level of performance that they had the week before against New Zealand. But it's like games like the Wales game in Cardiff, I think is like almost a big banana skin for England as well, because it becomes like if they have a really good Six Nations and they may be guaranteed for second place, so long as they beat this terrible Wales team that's lost every game by 80 points, and then Wales go, no, actually, we're not going to lose, they come out really fired up. Does that become the real banana skin game?
Well, England versus Wales, it doesn't matter. Form goes out the window.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that from past experience. It doesn't matter what's happened. That game is just totally, it's a game within a game, that one. If you want to hear more insight into England, then click the link here. It is with myself, Coley, and Anthony Watson. Who is the player to watch for England?
I think Marcus Smith might have been the form player in the world over the last kind of 6 months. And I think if he can keep that up, that's hugely important. But Alex Mitchell coming back into this team feels huge. I think he is, again, one of the most improved players in the world over the last few years. He's become such a vital part of how England play. And obviously, your old position, but very much your shirt he's been keeping warm. And I think he's so good for Northampton every week. And he's been so good when he goes, in the last few years. And yeah, really excited by how he goes.
He's pivotal. He is really pivotal, because we saw a lot of change in that position during the autumn, and actually him coming in actually ignites that attack, which has been a bit stagnant.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see if Marcus goes to fullback though.
Yeah.
Whether they go Finn Smith at 10, like structurally, I don't know. We'll see. Find out more. Click the link. Me and Ant and Coley go into more detail. Right. You've got Scotland down as 4. And for years, everyone sort of recently, because they've got a bit of a golden generation, or so it keeps saying, but that is getting less and less.
Yeah.
Where are they at? There's always that expectation they might be their year finally, but they haven't actually ever won a Six Nations.
It's got beyond Gloucester
They've
levels.
won a Five Nations before you put a comment below. Yes, they have, but they've not won a Six Nations.
It's got beyond Gloucester levels if it could be their year. Like it's hit this level of like every year it's, this could be Scotland's year. And I think this could be Scotland's year and they could finish first. I can see it, but I think maybe I'm just tired of wondering that. And it's been every year you kind of go, but this could be it. And I think 2021 really felt like the one, and then they slipped up right at the end of that Reece Ammett try. I think that was his name, Reece Ammett. I barely remember him. I don't know what happened to him.
Reece Judas, is that how you see him as a Welsh fan?
Yeah.
You need him. You need him back. You need him back.
But yeah, that like late try and they kind of slipped up there and then the momentum kind of went, but they still had a really good year. And I kind of feel like there's been a few of those false dawns since. And you then look at this England team being more fired up, that not being the weird banker it's been, despite, whatever form's been. Scotland will turn up and be world beaters against England. And if they played like that in every game, they'd be the world number one side. But it just isn't happening, And I don't know. I feel like they'll win their games at home. But my gut says this is finally the year that England takes the Calcutta Cup back. And that might lead to them kind of slipping a bit. Unless, of course, we see, I think they're either looking at Grand Slam or fourth, would be my way of kind of putting it. And I think fourth feels far more likely. Yeah,
it's strange, isn't it? Because you look at, I think for years, Scotland has often been, certainly recent years now, Scotland have sort of got that belief now that they can beat England and everything like that. But I agree. I think England should be at home, have enough to beat Scotland. They've got Ireland's second game, which is at home for them. but then beaten Ireland in 10 games.
That's true.
But then it's but then as we've discussed Ireland earlier, it's like Scotland for me is, I'm more unsure about where they'll finish more than the others. I feel like quite confident in what I believe the others will finish.
Yeah.
But Scotland, I'm not quite sure.
Completely.
But when you look at the way that they play and we look at the insights, so like for all their like movement and everything like that, one thing they're very good coming out of their half. Like Finn Russell last year, he kicked the ball 81 times. Closest to him was second, which is Thomas Williams, 50 times.
Wow,
now, I know he does a lot of attacking kicks and he does crossfields up in the half and everything like that, but they're actually very efficient coming out of their half and everything like that. And for all his maverick, wonderful playmaking ability, a lot of people miss how well he is at actually just managing the game, like, and just doing the right thing at the right time coming out of your half. And then he brings all the other X factor bits that we all love and all the reels that we get to watch him do. But he's a very, very good at managing the game.
I think he's just brilliant at finding space, you know, and sometimes that's outside him. Sometimes that's like a little hole next to the defender in front of him. But often that is in the backfield, or that is, you know, in a corner somewhere, or that's straight down the middle because they're watching for the 50-22. And he's so good at just putting the ball, be it through his hands or off the boot, into wherever the space is. And that leads to Scotland kicking an awful lot, you know, and then building an attack off that, of managing to put the ball into situations where the opposition is struggling to, you know, kick it back and giving them a chance to counterattack. And like Blair Kinghorn's been on such good form for Toulouse. Like he's gone up levels since moving there. And really excited by how he goes. Tom Jordan was really good in the autumn as well. And he's, you know, more of a fly-off at Glasgow, but was really good at fullback. So he might be an option there as well. So they've got lots of options in the backfield. Obviously, you know, Darcy Graham, but particularly Duan van der Merwe being, you know, a name I think you've heard
to
of.
him, he'll punish you.
Yeah.
You know about that, yeah.
He has a knack of scoring against England.
Big tries, yeah.
He does. And him and Darcy Graham just keep
going
top
back
try
and
scorer
forth.
just going back and forth as well. So, but their back three they've actually got a luxury there of who they can pick.
I did a predictions video for rugby in 2025, and the two absolute bankers I wanted the game, because I was like absolutely confident in them, were Danny Care will sign a 1-year extension with Harlequins, and Duan van der Merwe will score at least 2 tries against England. Like, you just know they're coming. They happen every year.
One of those, hopefully.
One of those has happened already.
One's happened.
The other one,
we don't want to happen.
yeah.
What's the sort of insight to Scotland, Coley? Because, again, you played them last year. You played up there. Actually, England started the game really, really well. And then a couple of loose moments essentially fed their unstructured play.
Yeah, they're actually defensively, I think they concede like the least line breaks in the world, something like that, because they do put a lot of bodies in the line and they defend and they almost want to play rugby in your half. Like you say, being efficient they conserve their energy inside their own half, get out. Defensively, they slow the ball down, put men in tackle and stuff and make it a real tough. It's tough to go multiple phases against Scottish D. You can do it, but it's tough. They make it work for everything. And then conversely, when they're in your half, let's say they go carry. Finn Russell sits in behind. Like, he's probably unique in himself in the fact that he kind of quite happily just let the forwards carry around the corner, and he's looking for space somewhere, and then he'll target players. You see it in the Premiership week in, week out, don't you? He just, he sort of disappears for 4 phases, then pops up, makes a line break, or puts on through a hole, and he's that. Magic, I remember last year, we knew that we'd have to score points, and again, a lot of it was limiting those moments of magic from Scotland, which Scotland can create, like as they do in Van der Merwe, so it's twice against England now, running it from 50 metres and stuff like that. So it's limiting those opportunities, but you know, you have to realise that you can't, against Scotland, you almost have to score quick because you don't want to get into the grind of it, because they win those possession battles. Also, with Scotland, it's like the longer the game's tight, and the longer it gets towards the clock pressure, scoreboard pressure, clock pressure, and it's tight. Like, they've had a knack of scoring almost late against England. You know, when I think of up there a couple of years ago, I think they did a crossfield. They went crossfield off a scrum, crossfield again. Luke Cowan-Dickey was playing volleyball. He got sent off. Marler decided that he was going to throw in the next line out. And honestly, I don't know. I still don't know to the bottom why he decided to do that. But he threw in. I think he did it like a knot straight. But it was just chaos. And we lost that game. And then even the one in 2023. Again, we're in a position of relative control, although it was tight. You know, and then they end up going sort of wide, and then Van der Merwe scores again. It's sort of like they just have that. If they're in it at the end, it's like they have the ability to convert because of some of their individuals. I think like Finn Russell
and the way they play.
I think the thing about Scotland is, you know, have the players that will take, not risks, but they will keep playing towards the end of the game. And they've got that, not maverick, I don't want to say that, but Finn Russell is confident enough in his own ability to back himself and take chances at the end of the game. I think you did a really good breakdown on Monday's episode of him and Tuipolotto's, range of passing and their ball movement, didn't you? And I think that, at the end of the game, they back themselves. And, when you back yourselves, you get fortune favours the brave in that regard. And they put the ball out there and they go, don't they? So that's what they do.
They do. It is a great episode. And here's the link. You can click on that and watch that. Who's the one to watch for Scotland then?
Related note, Sione Tuipolotto, I think has been unbelievable last year. Like, came out the Six Nations where he was really great last year. Went into that running with Glasgow where his form went up so many levels and he was the key player in them going in and winning that URC. And then from there, he's just kept that up. And he has everything you'd want from an inside centre. He's so good with the ball. His distribution, his range of passing, how subtle his body language is. You often can't read him and read if he's going to carry or he's going to give a long ball or he's going to just drop it off short. And then, he's got that kind of bump far edge as well that he can, hit and you'll stay here, and he can carry so well that I just think he's got the complete range of skills and he's been so good the last year.
Right. Move on to fifth. And I still can't believe you've done this as a Welshman. But you put Italy as fifth.
I've been watching it. I've been watching last year.
You put Italy as fifth.
Yeah. Italy have often been the team I'm most interested and excited by going into a Six Nations because over the last year they've been really building something, and we saw that kind of come to fruition last year of them having their best from a wins perspective Six Nations ever. And it then becomes, can they kick on from there? And I think it might be more difficult. I think teams will be taking them much more seriously. I think we'll see less rotation against Italy that traditionally a lot of teams have done, and we'll see teams being more ready for what they can bring. I think a big part of the interesting question is their kicking game, which has been very up and down. And I think in the autumn, we saw like that Argentina game was the closest feeling match I've ever seen in an absolute battering, where Italy were in the game and the game was back and forth and it felt like that. But Argentina finished more of Italy's chances than Italy did. Yeah. And that becomes a bit of an issue. And then there's the fact that they've kicked much more since Quesada came in. And I think that was a big change last year and led to them kind of kicking on a bit. No pun intended. But the next element is, can they improve on that? I think Paolo Garbizi's kicking's come on in an enormous way. That was when he first came in, he had the rest of his game pretty complete, from the jump. But that's really improved over the last year or two. Scrum half's the difficult position, because Alessandro Garbizi's been up and down for Benetton, been in and out the team. You've then had Pajarello hasn't been starting, and Stephen Varney obviously has left mid-season to go to Van, where he's been, again, jumping in and out of the team. So you haven't got someone that's been playing regular rugby and been playing consistently to come in and kind of boss things from the 9 jersey. And it's such a vital position with how they play, both in terms of tempo and in terms of kicking.
I think in previous years, Italy each test match has almost been trying to build towards something and trying to grow. Yeah. Where I look at them now, the autumn is part of that, but in the Six Nations, they actually have the last few years, the actual belief, the actual evidence that they can really go after it and be more target that tournament, rather than essentially just do calendar years and just play and try and give guys more exposure and everything like that. And I feel like the autumn's almost that for them. Yeah. But the Six Nations can be taken a lot more. Not saying they didn't take it seriously, but they're generally going in with right, we can be competitive here. We can, France last year, it's he slipped over, didn't he?
Yeah.
Bless him.
Yeah.
But it is. I just think that they can actually have that belief of actually we can go do something.
Yeah. And I think that is the thing with Italy, is they build, all their rugby's built around the Six Nations. And so some teams build around the World Cup. Some teams build around just having a competitive team at all times, regardless. Yes. But for Italy, it's the Six Nations. That is
absolutely Six Nations.
The time it's, it's a headline. It's the time people talk about it. And it's what their entire program is geared around, is having a good Six Nations. And that's going to be huge. I think the big factor for them is where the home and away games fall this year. In the Wales, as the game they're most likely to win away, is at home this year, and they've beaten Wales in Cardiff the last twice they've played there. That potentially takes a win away from them that they could have, Scotland will be a different game at Murrayfield to them, obviously beating them in Rome last year. But that becomes the difficult thing. They've never really performed at Twickenham. Other than that, that one in 2013 when which obviously led to the Wales winning the championship the week later. Because like they turned up and they were just brilliant for 80 minutes and just gave Wales a real like assist and the points difference chart, which really helped, and I remember very fondly. But I've got to hang on to something here.
God damn you!
But like, but basically every other time Italy turn up to Twickenham, it's their worst performance of like the 2-year Six Nations cycle. Like it's the one game they don't tend to perform in. I didn't intend to go on that little like.
No, you're fine, but it's the psychological thing, as I said before. It's that psychological where they've come and they've obviously done the ruck where they just haven't competed because essentially it's damage limitations where actually they haven't got that psychological barriers now because they can be competitive in all of them. Yeah. And like I say, I honestly think that they are going to have a say in terms of like bonus points. I reckon they could take a scalp, and it's going to be very, very interesting.
Yeah.
So who is your player to watch for Italy in the tournament?
I've gone generally, backs and back rowers so far, but Mirko Spagnuolo, the prop, who I think is superb, and I think is, alongside Joaquin Oviedo of Argentina, like one of the most underrated like tier 1 players over the last year. I thought he was absolutely brilliant all of last year and has been for Benetton when he's played. I think he's like in all of Europe, the top 4 turnovers this year, having played significantly less minutes because he's been often coming off the bench and so on for Benetton. And then last year was like up there for turnovers. He was up there for like carries and impacts per minute. And then also is, and much better than me, but like a very good scrummager as well. And has like made a real impact at scrums when he's come on generally. And whether he starts over Fischetti, who's a really good, like almost Geffen Jenkins style loose end, he makes a lot of tackles, really big engine. But I think like it's that loose head position for me that's really interesting for Italy.
No, that's great that a front rower is getting a shout out. Underappreciated in all things, including World Rugby's Player of the Year.
Justice for Ox.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. Well said.
So moving on.
Do we have to?
Oh, go on then. You use your predictions. And you've got Wales at 6.
I think this is just kind of where Wales are at the minute. I think the last couple of years have been very, very difficult. There are bright sparks, and I think Wales will be better than they were last year. And there were some solid performances last year. But an awful lot of it was bringing through a young crop of players, because I do think there's like a really talented group of youngsters. A lot of them made the final of the like COVID era Junior World Cup. And admittedly, like when you look at that, they got the easiest draw in the world. Like all the other good sides on the other side of the draw, but that's fine. They still made the final, and we've seen a lot of those players kind of come through and kick on. And there's a lot more of them that can be coming through, in the next year or so. But the key thing is like integrating that, because last year they went almost in too hard with some of the more experienced players. And we saw bits of that in the autumn, the likes of Gareth Anscombe coming back in, Thomas Williams coming back in. But it becomes difficult to see a way that they win more than one game. I think, as I said earlier, I think the England game is targetable right at the end. And I think Italy, again, is the game you've got to kind of eye up as the main one. But France feels like a free hit. Ireland feels like there's no expectation on it whatsoever. And Scotland, Gatland always had a really, really good record against. I think he didn't lose until he came back. Like over his first 10, he didn't lose to Scotland once. And that doesn't feel, again, like winning in Murrayfield feels like too lofty a climb. And I think the other thing with just from a Welsh perspective is there aren't that many injuries, but the injuries that have come in really key positions. So Dewi Lake being maybe the standout player last year, and then Adam Beard. And like one stat I've thrown out a lot, because one of the things about Welsh rugby is like unflashy but very competent players aren't the most popular. But like Wales' line-out stat in 2023 with Adam Beard was 91%, and in 2024 it was 92%. Without Adam Beard, it's 71 and 73%. Like he's worth about 20% of your line-out ball as in effect for Wales. And him being out for at least the first few rounds is huge as well. So I don't know. I think there's cause for optimism, but the optimism might manifest in a few years' time instead.
Yeah.
Do you think with what all the teams spoke about so far, it's sort of like an evolution of how they've played? Obviously, there's been no coaching changes, but we expect more of the same from France. Ireland to be similar, England, Scotland, everyone's basically, they've got their paths of how they play, and it's the evolution of that. Wales, where they are, do you think they're going to keep? Do you reckon they'll go down a different path, or do you reckon they'll keep playing the way they're playing, but just hope that the players they've brought in are better adapted to the system? Because obviously a lot of young players played, and bringing back those veterans helps them on the path.
It was one of the interesting things last year is that Gatland brought in a lot of like young Cardiff and Scarlets players and got them to play like the Ospreys. And you're kind of a bit like, well, you could have just pulled from the other pack that's used to doing this week in, week out. But when Wales were, had a very good World Cup by expectation standards, won that group, it was off playing like the most physically demanding brand of rugby where they were making more tackles. Like they set a world record for most tackles made in the test match against Fiji. And they kicked a lot of ball away and they wanted the opportunity to defend, and they made a lot of double tackles, and it was exhausting, but it led to this team basically overperforming, the expectations. And I don't think you can do that when you don't have the months to prepare for playing a handful of games, and I think even by the second half of that Argentina quarterfinal, like they'd run out of steam a bit. And again, obviously, you'd know better than me having been through those camps, but like you could see a bit them tiring, I felt. And I don't know whether you can keep that that style won't work in a Six Nations where they can't prepare for it, especially. I think there is a chance to kind of evolve a style of play, but it's never been the Warren Gatland way. And, bringing back in Rob Howley as the attack coach is very much feels like going back to what they were doing, 10 years ago. And for a long time, that really worked. I do think like there is something slightly timeless about the Warren Ball, like effort-based style of play that, you can kind of, if your effort is high enough and it's working, like you can overcome a team that's more skillful and more powerful than you. But it becomes like, is that gulf between the skill and the power too great? I don't know. It's hard to say. And I think we start to see some like evolutions in the attack in the autumn. But again, it partly became like, is the personnel there to play it? It became really difficult because they'll bring the wingers in to get more touches. And then obviously we had the Fiji game where Sam Costello ended up on the wing and wasn't really sure what he was doing there. And yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see.
That's the thing I have to look at, like, you look at what Gatland, it's under pressure, you revert to what you said, no, and Gatland Ball, we know about, but you look at that, the Welsh team, it was a generation of golden players, like a golden generation of players in regards to like from your Adam Jones up front, through Alan Wins, the back rowers, Tipperick, Warburton, Falatau, and the back line, Jamie Roberts at the thing.
Bigger, Jamie Roberts, Jonathan
Liam Williams,
Foxy,
Fox, they're just world-class players. So like you can give world-class players a simple game plan because they just execute on pure skill. Whereas to say, now it's almost like just revert back to that being tough to play against, and as you say, work rate, which will win you games, but it's so attritional. But when you've got world-class players, they have that spark to do it.
And another one of that sort of golden generation is Liam Williams, and sat down with him on YouTube. Hit subscribe and you'll get notified when that drops, and you can listen to him as he gives his insight into Wales. Player to watch for Wales?
Yeah, I think it's whoever wears the 10 jersey. And I think this is the interesting question, because you have Gareth Anscombe, wore it in the autumn, is probably the best 10 available, has pulled up injured for Gloucester in the last few weeks. Is he going in 100%? Not sure. Sam Costello is now also carrying an injury. This feels like it could be a really important year for him to kick on, because he's an incredibly talented player. And he perhaps, like, when he's been wearing that kind of red Welsh shirt, hasn't always... like, look, he's had the kind of confidence and belief in his ability, and like if he can start to build that, that's really interesting. But the other name that's coming up is Dan Edwards, the youngster at the Ospreys, who has been phenomenal the last year as a kind of 20-year-old. Like, feels a bit like a Gen Z reboot of Dan Biggar, in that he's got that kind of like confidence and self-belief, but he's incredibly laid back about it, and he's just kind of taken everything in his stride. And I can see him, if he gets an opportunity, being huge for Wales and kind of swinging games. And you saw him like it was the first game of 80 minutes he played, his professional career. He kicked the drop goal in the last minute to win the game. And, he scored a try, and I think his second touch of pro rugby. And he's just like, he looks like the real deal, and he's getting better and better all the time. And I'd be really excited if he gets an opportunity.
Well, there we have it. That is your predictions. That's the teams. We've got players to watch, a little bit of thoughts on all the teams. Squidge, thank you so much for joining us. Will you actually join us for a quiz? Six Nations quiz?
Absolutely. I've been waiting to hear those words.
There we go. That's the main event as well. So, mate, thank you so much for joining us. And there we go. There we have it.